Hey everybody, it's Mr. Wagstaff. Man, you gonna like today. We got some crazy stuff to talk about. Uh, it's almost like every day you just get crazier and crazier stories, which are more and more enjoyable to learn about. In large part because they're so shocking. The absolute ridiculousness that takes place in American history is shocking in a lot of times. What makes it also really enjoyable is the fact you've probably never heard these stories before. The fact that the amount of crazy stuff that we're going to talk about today that actually happened in the United States history, and you've never heard about it. We're going to start talking about today the Kansas-Nebraska Act. And you're like, oh, this seems boring. Ho, ho, ho. Furthest thing from that. All right, let's go ahead and get started because you're going to like this, all right? If you like just awfulness, then you'll like this because this gets out of hand real quick in American history. All right. So we had been talking about America who had gained all this land from Mexico. All right. Once we had gained all this land from Mexico, let me go ahead and show you a map here. Once we had gained all this land from Mexico, really all of this over here is going to drastically increase tensions. Again, we got the land from the Mexican-American War, all right, because we wanted good farmland. Well, almost all of it is below the 3630 line. So the argument immediately becomes the expansion of slavery. So the North is against slavery. I can't reiterate enough to try to put yourself in the mindset of the time period. If you're from the North, you're adamantly against slavery. You're probably still racist, because racism was prevalent. But slavery is astronomically 10 billion times worse than racism, all right? Not that racism isn't completely horrific. Slavery is a whole nother level because you don't exist as a human. So, if you're in the North, you're generally adamantly against slavery, all right? The South supports it for they need it for their way of life. With the expansion of all these territories after the Mexican-American War, the South wants to spread slavery all out into this region over here. The North absolutely does not want the expansion of slavery. Here's where you got to understand. Nobody in the 1850s, all right, 1860s is going to be the Civil War, so we're getting there. In the 1850s, nobody in their right mind from the North ever thought that you could just go to South Carolina, go to North Carolina, go to Georgia and be like, your slaves are free now. Like, that is complete insane talk. Like, there's 0% chance that happens. All right? What they want is to not let it expand. Don't let it show up in a place it's not already at. It's like a disease, according to the North. Don't let it spread. All right? So that is what the argument is on the spread of slavery. Because even the most adamant abolitionist doesn't see a way forward in making slavery go away in the South. So it's baby steps. And baby steps is don't let it spread. Spoiler alert, Civil War. You may have heard about something called the Emancipation Proclamation, and we'll talk about that. But the 13th Amendment will make slavery illegal in the whole country. Over 500,000 Americans are going to have to die in a war before that happens. And it's getting ready to happen. We're building up to the Civil War. So prior to the Civil War, while tensions are high, the actual logic that you could go in down here and get rid of it is, yeah, people would love to make that happen, but they know that the South would rather die than give up their slaves. And in large part, a lot of them do. So the arguments that are going to lead to the Civil War, and the Kansas-Nebraska Act is a big part of that, is actually the expansion of slavery out into here. All right? So, with California coming in and the Compromise of 1850, which kind of threw the Missouri Compromise out, all right? Now a lot of these territories, they get to choose based on popular sovereignty, all right? Popular sovereignty is a big fancy word that means the people get to choose whether or not they want to be a slave state or a free state. So it comes down to Kansas. This is a territory, all right? Kansas gets to choose whether they want to be a slave state or a free state under the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Basically, at this point, people were just ignoring the Missouri Compromise. Because if they'd stuck with the Missouri Compromise, all right, and it hadn't been basically eliminated with the Compromise of 1850, then Kansas wouldn't have the option to be a slave state. The Missouri Compromise said anything above this line can't be a slave state, but the Compromise of 1850 allowed California to be a free state, but then also threw out the Missouri Compromise. So, all right, you got to kind of understand all the moving parts here to understand the craziness is getting ready to happen. Kansas. Kansas gets to choose whether they want to be a slave state or a free state. Now, the issue is there's like nobody that lives in Kansas. There's like 3 people and a bear, I guess. All right. Basically, it comes down to whichever way Kansas votes is basically the direction the country will head into. If Kansas votes to be a slave state, well, once Kansas votes to be a slave state, slavery will probably continue to expand. If Kansas votes to be a free state, there is a good chance that you will be able to stop the expansion of slavery in the future. All right. So the vote for Kansas becoming a state, and really the only reason they're going to let Kansas become a state is because so many people were passing through it on the gold rush. So there's not a lot of people that live in Kansas, but they kind of need it to be a state since so many Americans go back and forth through it. So when it comes time for Kansas to vote on whether they're going to be a slave state or a free state, there's only like 3 people that live in the state. All right. So like these 3 people, and I'm exaggerating on that. And these like 3 people though, this really, really, really small group basically decides the fate of America and slavery moving forward. All right. Well, the whole country is really concerned about which way Kansas will vote. So much so, a new political party is going to come out for the first time, and their entire platform is anti-slavery. That political party is the Republican Party. 1854, the Republican Party comes out adamantly against slavery. All right. The same Republican Party that we have today. The Republicans come out, again, their number one platform is we are against slavery. The Democrats, same Democrats that we have today, overwhelmingly supported slavery. Republicans are against it. Now, anybody that's political nowadays, and you're like, wait a minute. That's also the whole North up here is really going to end up becoming Republican, and the South is going to turn into Democrats. So the political parties still exist. Their ideologies have drastically changed over time. Obviously, now both absolutely are horrified by the existence of slavery ever existed in the United States. Today, Democrats, and when this is recorded in 2020, today the Democrats are the liberal party, the ones that want a lot of change. The Republicans are considered the conservative party, the ones that don't want to change a whole lot. All right. When in the 1850s, that was opposite. And up until about the 1930s, the Democrats are the conservatives and the Republicans are the liberals. And then they basically just switched team names in the 1930s. So we'll get that when we get there. But yeah, basically, a lot of times the people who would have been Republicans, 50 years ago, or I should say 100 years ago, in 1920, would be Democrats now, and vice versa. All right, because but again, with slavery, that's a whole different thing. So Republicans absolutely do come out against slavery. They are from the North, and in the South, they are going to be Democrats, and they support slavery. All right. So this is a little picture. This little area is where they created the Republican Party, and then it kind of spread like wildfire. So their main issue is slavery in America. Now, are they trying to cancel slavery? No. They are not trying to cancel slavery. Why? Because that's crazy talk. It's like ingrained in the fabric of American society. So what they want to do is stop it from expanding. They don't want it anywhere new. All right. So when the Republicans come out, they hate slavery, hate it with a passion. If they could just wave a magic wand to make slavery disappear, they could, but there's no such thing as a magic wand that can do that at the time. So their main focus is stop it from expanding. It's evil enough as it is. We're not going to let it spread. So the Republicans are adamantly against the Kansas-Nebraska Act because it allows for the possibility that Kansas could possibly be a slave state, and they're like, that's a no-go. All right. So when the Kansas vote for slavery takes place, all right, there are there's people who flood into Kansas. Let me go back up to this map here. All right. So people are going to start flooding into Kansas from around the country. All right. The reason they're coming in is because there's nobody really in Kansas that can vote. All right. There's like 3 people. All right. And they're not going to leave it up to such a small percentage of people. So Missouri, which is a slave state, have a whole bunch of people that come into Kansas in order to cast a vote in order for it to be a slave state. There's a lot of people that come from the north that are part of this new Republican Party that come down into Kansas to vote. They are called free soilers. So people who don't want states to have the ability to have slaves are called free soilers. They have like their own team name. Free soilers would also be Republicans. All right. Now, what types of people are going to travel all across the country into Kansas from the north, or travel all across the south to get to Kansas to cast a vote? What type of people are those? Are those normal people? No. Those are very, very strong, convicted people who are willing to fight for their beliefs. So they are not showing up to be passive. So you have a whole bunch of people showing up into Kansas to vote. All right. So these are 2 of the founders of the Free Soiler parties, which are part of the Republican Party. This is a really famous cartoon. You'll see it all the time. And it's hard to make out a lot of times on the test if I've ever tried to put it on a test because the words are so small. But this is basically supposed to symbolize forcing slavery down the throat of free soilers. Like people that don't want slavery, you're kind of forcing them to deal with it. All right. So, not surprisingly, the people who show up, let me move this over here. The people who show up from the north and the people who show up from the south, so the free soilers from the north and the people who show up from the south, they're not going to get along here in Kansas. Keep in mind, Kansas isn't a state. It's a territory. So there's no police, there's no military, there's no way of intervening because that only happens once you're a state. Kansas is going to vote on becoming a state and if they want to be a slave state or a free state. Like that's what the vote is. So as Kansas becomes a state, they decide if they want to be a slave state or free state at the same vote. All right. So not surprisingly, the people do not get along that come in from either side. So all the northerners who come in here, all right, who are against slavery, all right, they're going to come in here into Topeka. All right. So all the people that are against slavery show up in Topeka. The people who want to keep slavery, they show up here in Lecompton. All right. So the Northerners are in Topeka, and Lecompton is for the anti-slavery. Lecompton supports slavery. Topeka is against slavery. Now the reason they have to have 2 separate capitals, because they hate each other. There's no possible way that these groups are going to get along living in the same town, sharing the same post office and things like that. They hate each other with a passion. Absolutely 100% cannot stand each other. And it doesn't take long for this to start getting out of hand. All right. So, gosh, it's crazy, man. So, Topeka and Lecompton talk trash to each other. All right. So, Topeka has a newspaper in which they talk trash about the people in Lecompton. They're like, oh, those pro-slavery people, trash. They talk a whole bunch of trash about them, all right? Obviously, the people in Lecompton don't like it because they're like, stop talking trash about me. And so the 2 towns aggressively dislike each other. Well, one night, all right, a group of people, let me get a color here, come from Lecompton over, yellow is probably not the best one there, go from Lecompton over to Topeka in the middle of the night, and they destroy their newspaper building, all right? So let me catch up there, all right? So they show up and they destroy a newspaper building in Topeka. So the people who support slavery, all right, from Lecompton show up in Topeka and destroy a newspaper building, right? Nobody gets killed. They just destroy the building. They burn it down in the middle of the night. And then they run back laughing back to Lecompton. All right, like ha 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 ha. So in the morning, the people wake up. All right, the anti-slavery people wake up and they realize that their newspaper building has been burned down, and they're furious about it because this is a newspaper building that talked trash about them, and you know they're just really angry. Enter this man, John Brown. So, I think you can look at this picture of him and realize this is a very intense man. All right, John Brown's crazy. Let's just go ahead and put it out there. John Brown's crazy. All right. So John Brown is anti-slavery. All right. So John Brown views slavery as completely evil. So you're probably like, okay, he can't be that bad. I mean, he thinks slavery is evil. Like, okay, understandable. Now, here's the things about John Brown that start a little different. John Brown believes he is God's chosen instrument to end slavery. All right, like personally. And you're like, okay, the man's focused, and you're like, okay. Like, so John Brown says he talks to God all the time. Like, cool, yeah, he prays all the time. Like, no, like, he's like, nah, I talk to God, like, every day. Like, oh, cool, you pray every day. He's like, no, like, I play poker with him on Tuesdays. And you're like, oh, you're, like, extra. So John Brown believes he is, like, not that he's the reincarnation of Moses, who freed all the Israelites from bondage in the Bible, but that he is the modern, in his era, the modern version of that, and God has put him on earth to end slavery. Now, John Brown also has like 50 sons. Like we'll come back and mention this. He has a whole bunch of sons, tons of sons. I should probably look that up. I believe he has more than 10, and I think he has more than 10 sons. And so these groups that he does crazy stuff with are all his sons. Because you're like, how is this man getting people on his side to do these weird things? They're his sons. So they're all grown. They're grown. They're probably in their 20s. So John Brown, he has traveled out here waiting for the right time to strike back against the evil pro-slavery people. So he's an anti-slavery person. He is here in Topeka. Are you ready for the story to get crazy? All right. So they burned down a newspaper building, the people who support slavery did, and they ran back into Lecompton. All right. John Brown from Topeka gets his boys together, like literally, like his son. He takes 4 of his sons with him, and they go over to a little town that's right next to Lecompton called Potawatomi Creek. All right. They do a home invasion on 3 separate houses. They take the men from those houses in front of their wives and children, and they take them out to the creek, and they execute them in front of their wives because they support slavery. They do this in 5 separate houses. Now, if that doesn't horrify you enough, does he take them out and shoot them? No. They take them out and they hack them to death with a broadsword. That's how they kill the men. They hack them to death with a broadsword, like the Crusades, because he feels like this is a more religious symbolism. So he wakes these families up in the middle of the night, takes the men out, and executes them in front of their families. All right? Then he's going to flee back to Topeka with his sons. All right? The next day, the pro-slavery side wakes up. They see what has happened, and they are furious. They basically, so Topeka and Lecompton just charge each other and start fighting. Like, an all-out war takes place in Kansas. They actually have a name for it in history. It's called Bleeding Kansas. As weird as that sounds, it is called Bleeding Kansas. Now, if a state just starts fighting itself, today we'd send in our military. However, The vote hasn't happened yet in Kansas. There is no rules here. So these people are just like hacking each other to death in the streets and shooting each other. And a civil war has happened here in Kansas. And the United States government, since it's not a state, doesn't have any jurisdiction to send the military in here and stop this, much less which side are they going to pick. Because these are technically Americans fighting Americans in like territory property. So it's shocking. So this starts, and it just keeps going. So this is a picture of one of the towns getting sacked. This is another picture, just the horrificness that happened. This is in Lawrence, Kansas. There's absolute awfulness that is taking place here in Kansas. This is another picture of them just charging out and mowing people down from both sides, pro-slavery, anti-slavery. It is just an absolute crazy situation. Now, John Brown is going to come out of this situation. He's the guy who went and slaughtered those 5 men. John Brown may be the most divisive person in American history. The single most divisive person. Because this man went and slaughtered 5 men in front of their families for their beliefs. He should be considered a bad guy, right? He is a hero in the North. The North, they write songs about him, how awesome he is. Yay, John Brown, John Brown. Like, it is absolutely, he is a legend in the North for this. The South is just, hates him with a passion. All right. So John Brown ends up leaving Topeka. He is not killed or anything at the time because there's more story to come up with him. John Brown, the photograph I showed you of him. Let me go back up here. Where's it at? This photograph here of John Brown shows him clean shaven. As soon as this happens at Pottawatomie Creek, and he's going to be around for a couple more years after this, he starts growing a beard. So after this, you'll see him with these big bushy beard because he believes he is like Moses, a modern Moses, and should have a big beard. So this is a famous picture of him. But as soon as the situation happens and they slaughter the 5 men, he's going to start growing a beard. So as he... I jumped to it too quick. I'll go ahead and show it to you then. So John Brown has this painting made of him while he is super popular. If that don't make you look crazy, all right, but he sees this picture, likes this picture, and says, absolutely, that's a good representation of me. John Brown believes he is, bigger than life, all right, and is not afraid to murder people for their views on slavery, all right. And he's actually we're going to come back to him and adamantly supports slaves rising up and killing all the white people in the South. So the North loves John Brown, all right? The South hates him. So he's like a serial killer. The North loves him. Granted, I mean, slavery's evil, but, at the time, there's no logic being used on either side. And there is no in between. And I think the reception John Brown gets is the perfect example of that in society. That it's an all or nothing situation. That violence is just going to happen at this point. So, because they can't talk things out, nobody's going to reevaluate their position on slavery. They either support it or they're against it. And people don't really change their minds at the time. So John Brown, this is a painting of him. The violence in Kansas, in bleeding Kansas, continues. All right. And it kind of shocks a lot of people. But the violence doesn't just stay there in Kansas. Violence goes to the Capitol. And this story it's famous. Now, there's been some crazy stuff that has happened in the House of Representatives before. All right. People getting in fist fights and stuff. That has happened. All right. House of Representatives are, there's a lot of people in the House of Representatives, over 500. And they are from very, very small regions in different states. So every now and then you get some crazy people in the House of Representatives and crazy people and other crazy people. Sometimes crazy stuff happens. The Senate, all right, has to kind of be the adults of the United States. The Senate, our senator represents an entire state, all right? And at this time, you can't even vote for your senator. They're appointed by the government. So, like, a state government is like, okay, we need somebody to go be mature in the government. So we are going to appoint these senators to go represent our state in the federal government to keep everything else in check. So this story takes place in the Senate, and that's one of the reasons it's so famous. The Senate are the adults of America. Like, they're the ones that are like, okay, let's not get wild and crazy on it. Let's look at this logically. The Senate's the one that's going to compromise. The Senate's the one that gets to do the big boy stuff, like confirm Supreme Court justices and laws and things like that. And they work with the House of Representatives, but House of Representatives, those are like commoners. So the Senate are the fancy, mature people who not a lot of crazy stuff happens. So the fact that this situation happens in the Senate makes it so, like, twice as crazy, and is one of the reasons we're going to talk about it. So let me go through and tell you this story. And the whole purpose of this story is to show you how far America has gone from being civil over slavery. So let's start out talking about this guy named Charles Sumner. He's a senator. So the Senate sees what is happening in Kansas. They are horrified by it. Like, I can't believe this is taking place. Oh my gosh. Like, what are we going to do? Oh my gosh. So they stand up every day and they talk a lot. All right. Now they've divided like Republican and Democrat pretty much. There's people that are anti-slavery and people that are pro-slavery. It used to be you didn't really want to talk about slavery because you'd make people mad. Now the gloves are off and you'll just talk all the trash that you want. Charles Sumner is a senator. All right. He is an abolitionist senator. He's from the North, adamantly against slavery. So Charles Sumner, absolutely against slavery. He stands up one day in the Senate and talks massive trash about a senator who is now retired. He may have already passed away at this point when Charles Sumner talks trash about him. A guy named Andrew Butler. So Charles Sumner talks trash about this dude, Andrew Butler, for stuff that Andrew Butler had done in the past. All right. So Andrew Butler isn't even there. All right. Andrew Butler supports slavery, and Charles Sumner says Andrew Butler is a massive sack of crap, and that Andrew Butler is the whole reason slavery exists. He just basically talks a whole bunch of trash to him. All right. So, and Andrew Butler's not even there because he's either retired or he's dead at this point. I can't remember at the time. But he is not actually there when the trash talk takes place. All right. So, once again, Charles Sumner, against slavery, talks trash about Andrew Butler, who supported slavery. Just a normal day in the Senate. Well, what Charles Sumner doesn't realize is that even though Andrew Butler isn't there, his nephew is Preston Brooks. All right. So Preston Brooks is a family member of Andrew Butler. All right. He is extremely offended that Charles Sumner would talk trash about Andrew Butler, who is Preston Brooks's uncle. You with me so far? All right. So when, once again, Charles Sumner gets done talking trash about Andrew Butler, Preston Brooks is really angry. It's on a Friday. Preston Brooks is like, he ain't going to talk about my family like that. So Preston Brooks leaves, and he is furious. Now, Preston Brooks is pro-slavery, supports slavery. And he's like, he ain't going to talk about my family like that. I ain't going to handle it. So he thinks all weekend, and he stews. So this wasn't an impulsive thing that happens. This is planned. He walks in on Monday with his boy, Lawrence Keat. I just have him listed here as henchman, because that's pretty much what he is. So Preston Brooks walks over to, once again, Charles Sumner. All right. So Preston Brooks walks over to Charles Sumner with a cane and says, Charles, you ain't going to talk junk about my family. And as Preston Brooks, or as Charles Sumner tries to stand up from his desk to talk to Preston Brooks with this mahogany cane just hits him in the head with it as hard as he can. And then continues to beat the living bejesus out of him in front of everybody. All right? This guy, pulls a gun on the rest of the people to not jump in on this beating that's taking place. So this is supposed to be him. He does not have a stick. He has a gun. He brought a gun in there and pulls a gun on the rest of the senators so they can't get involved, as Preston Brooks beats the living bejesus out of Charles Sumner. Charles Sumner tries to get away. He's like trapped in his desk. He gets away and he gets beat unconscious. He is laying in the floor bleeding. Preston Brooks doesn't stop. All right. Preston Brooks continues to beat Charles Sumner's motionless body just over and over while everybody else is being held at gunpoint, just hearing the thud, 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 until his mahogany cane breaks on the body of Charles Sumner. All right. He looks up and everybody is shocked. And he's like, I quit. And like storms out. All right. Charles Sumner doesn't die, but he has permanent brain damage and he's never going to recover from it. It takes him 3 years to even like have any type of normalcy, like where he can feed himself and all that. So he doesn't die. And Charles Sumner and Preston Brooks is like, yeah, if I wanted to kill him, I would have brought a different weapon. So it wasn't attempted murder. Somehow he gets off of criminal trial from this. So you think that story is crazy enough. The story actually has an even crazier, I won't say ending, continuation of it. So when Preston Brooks here quit after he beat the living snot out of Charles Sumner, when he quit, he's from South Carolina. South Carolina has to have an immediate election, all right? So you can't just not have a senator. So they had an election, all right? And there's a whole bunch of people that ran for senator here. It's kind of rare for them to have this type of election. So all these different people run for election. Now, if there's not a candidate on the ballot that you like, you can write in a name, all right? The only time in history that a senator has been picked in a write-in ballot was in this election. With over 80% of the vote, somebody won that did not even run in this special election. Know who it was? Preston Brooks. The entire state voted him back in against his will. It's like, nah, you're going back. And Preston Brooks is like, all right, guess I'll go back. And Preston Brooks goes back to the Senate. When he walks into the Senate and he walks down to his desk, his first day is back, he gets a standing ovation by the rest of the people in the South. When he gets to his seat, there are dozens of canes that have been sent to him by people in the South that have been mailed and has showed up, and engraved on them it says, hit him again. Now, this is the Senate. This is the adults of America. And this is what is happening. This beating takes place just a few years before the start of the Civil War. And it's telling because words have stopped working. All right. We have now resorted to violence in our most prestigious part of our government, where you're like trying to beat people to death and holding his friends at gunpoint. So it has to happen. Not surprisingly, tensions are at an all-time high at this point in history. So we're going to be done for the day. But when we pick up tomorrow, tensions just keep getting crazier. All right. See you guys tomorrow.